Good morning. It is a good morning, and even with the rain, we are honored to be with you this morning. I'm glad you're here this morning. If you'll go ahead and turn in your Bibles to 1 Samuel chapter 17. 1 Samuel chapter 17. Like I said, it's an honor for my wife and I to be with you this morning. We come from Jackson, Tennessee, so it was quite the drive to get down here, but we enjoyed it. It was a good time to be with each other in the car. We went through Atlanta, and I don't know how long it usually takes to get through Atlanta, but Atlanta for us was about maybe an hour and a half to get through it. We stopped and started for about 5 or 6 times, and we didn't even rush hour. So we just had so many wrecks on the road. We enjoyed it nonetheless, and we're glad to be with you this morning. 1 Samuel 17, where we'll be studying. 1 Samuel 17 is a very popular, very well-known account in the Old Testament. It is David's conflict, his battle against, well, we can call it a battle, it didn't last very long, his conflict with Goliath. And though you may have heard of this account or may have studied this account many times in your life, there's one aspect about this account that I really want to focus on this morning, and that is overcoming fear. As we'll read in this account, the Israelites were afraid, but David possessed a courage unmatched by anyone else in the army of Israel. Let's talk about fear this morning. Is fear dangerous? And I like classes where there's interaction, just to let you know. I'm a guy who likes, especially in Bible class, to ask questions and have feedback and comments. So if that's okay with you. Is fear dangerous? How? Oh, what would you say? Not always. Okay. Okay. When would fear be dangerous to you? Absolutely. When it keeps you from doing something you should do. You know, in Revelation chapter 21, in verse 8, there's a list of different types of sinners there that will be, according to that passage, in the lake of fire. And I don't want to dwell too much on that passage this morning, but I want you to notice the first thing that's mentioned in that list in verse 8. It's not the murderers. Murderers are listed. It's not idolaters. But it's the fearful. It's the cowards. The cowardly is mentioned there. According to the Bible, what it means to be a coward is someone who allows fear to motivate them to disobey God. Say that again. That's important to what we're talking about. A coward is the person who allows fear to motivate them to disobey God. Whether it's doing something they're not supposed to do, or because of fear, oftentimes in the form of peer pressure, or not doing something that they are supposed to do. And a lot of times that's the case, whether it be fear of rejection or fear of not knowing enough, especially when it comes to studying the Bible with others. Fear is something that can be very dangerous, even eternally dangerous to the Christian. But there are times when fear is not only okay, it's necessary. When would fear ever be necessary, other than potentially getting on a shaky ladder? When would fear be necessary?
Well, when you're tempted to do wrong, the fear factor can come into your salvation.
Sure.
Stepping off on the wrong foot.
Sure. You're not a coward if fear keeps you from doing wrong, right? You're a coward if fear keeps you from doing right. When else would fear be not just okay, but actually a good and wise thing?
Well, fear of the Lord in a way that keeps you to your soul.
Okay. Sure. Okay.
We use the thing of reverence.
Sure. In Proverbs chapter 1 and verse 7, and Proverbs chapter 9 and verse 10, both of those passages it says, in chapter 1 verse 7 says, the beginning of knowledge is the fear of the Lord. Fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. In chapter 9 and verse 10 it says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. So if you want knowledge and you want wisdom, which is kind of the progression, knowledge to wisdom, it all begins with fearing the Lord. Now, oftentimes when we talk about that, we talk about the reverence we're supposed to have towards God. Fear in a reverential, awe-inspired sense. And that's true, that we are supposed to reverence God and have a holy respect for who God is and what he does. But is that the only case and the only sense in which we are to fear God? Some people say yes. I would say no. Here's why. As you had mentioned, Don. Matthew chapter 10, Jesus is talking to his apostles and he says to them, "Do not fear he who can kill the body but not the soul, but rather fear him who can destroy both soul and body in hell." That's not talking about reverential awe. That's talking about being afraid. Do not be afraid of the person who can kill the body but not the soul, but rather have that type of fear of the one who can destroy both soul and body in hell. It's the fear that keeps me from doing wrong. Now, in a sense, as we're Christians, that type of fear should also be balanced, because 1 John chapter 4 also teaches us that perfect love, complete love, mature love casts out fear. But that type of fear is a fear of condemnation, a fear of eternal damnation in hell. That's what that type of fear is about. We are to cast away that fear by maturing in the love of Christ, right? But we are always supposed to fear God. So not only is fear dangerous, fear is also necessary. In fact, it's like certain other emotions or attitudes. Anger is that way, right? Is anger necessary? We have it. God gave it to us. In fact, you don't know how to be a truly mature, righteous person without knowing how to be angry. There's some things that should make you angry. God's angry at things. But anger is also dangerous, isn't it? Anger can get out of control. And so fear is very much that way. The type of fear we're going to talk about this morning in 1 Samuel 17 is the cowardly fear. The fear that keeps one from doing what God wants them to do. Let's look at how the Israelites failed in this and how David overcame it. And look at principles we can learn from David in helping us overcome times where we experience fear and might motivate us to disobey God. 1 Samuel chapter 17, verses 1 through 5. Would someone might please read verses 1 through 5? Is that okay if I ask that of you? Someone read verses 1 through 5. Good and loud. All right, thank you. So we have the Israelites are gathered against the Philistines. Now the Israelites have been battling the Philistines for a while now. This is not the first time they had gone to war with each other. They're standing against each other, one army on one side of this valley, the valley of Elah, and the other army on the other side of this valley. Now the valley of Elah is not far from Jerusalem. It's actually, I haven't been there, but I've seen pictures of it, and it's a very pretty area. You have one camp on one side and another camp on the other side, and you have this valley in between them where they were to do battle. Well, the Philistines have this idea that they're going to send out their champion, this man named Goliath of Gath, one of the chief cities of the Philistines. And he comes out, and he is over 9 feet tall. Literally 6 cubits in a span is how the Hebrew reads. And the standard cubit was about 1.5 feet, about 18 inches. So that would make him over 9 feet tall. Now, I don't know about you. I've never met anybody over 9 feet tall. I've met some tall people. My in-laws are tall people. They're not 9 feet tall. 9 feet tall is pretty big. And this is a guy who's probably not just tall, but he's big because he's a warrior. He's well trained in that way. So he's intimidating, right? He is, what the Philistines think, is a perfect enemy against the Israelites. And he talks about the heaviness of the armor he wears. Several hundreds of pounds of just armor and weaponry that he has. Verse 7, now the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his iron spearhead weighed 600 shekels, and a shield bearer went before him. Then he stood and cried out to the armies of Israel, this is Goliath, and said to them, why have you come out to line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and you the servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves, and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and serve us. And the Philistine said, I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together. When Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. So the Philistine proposes this challenge. Goliath says, we don't need to go to battle with each other, the whole army versus another army. Send somebody out, your best guy out, and fight me. If he defeats me, we'll be your slaves. But if we defeat him, you'll be our slaves. That's his challenge for them. And then he says, I defy Israel. The word defy there in the original Hebrew means I curse you. It's more than just rebellion against. I curse you. I say that you're not worthy of this challenge. And it says that they were afraid. Not just Israel, the king, Saul, was afraid and greatly afraid. They were dismayed and greatly afraid. They saw Goliath in the path to their victory, overcoming their enemy, had this champion stand in their way. So the challenge is here, and the Israelites lost their faith. They failed the challenge. They are afraid of this man named Goliath. Now, why should the Israelites not have been afraid or even intimidated by Goliath? God was with them? Mm-hmm. The God who causes the Red Sea to stand like walls on either side. The God who brought the manna through the entire 40 years of wandering in the desert. The God who's already conquered nations with them. If you read Numbers, Deuteronomy, and Joshua. The God who's rescued them over and over again from various enemies, including the Philistines, using the judges like Samson. And now they're against the Philistines again, and one man comes out. One man. I get he's over 9 feet tall, but he's one man. And they're afraid. You know, sometimes fear comes against our better judgment. Sometimes we know what God has done in the past, and we know what God is capable of now, yet we allow something to stand in our way from obeying God, and that fear creeps in. The apprehension, the intimidation. Luckily for Israel, this is not where it ends for them, though. Let's continue on. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I think that's a time when we see things, and COVID was a little bit that way for us. They saw him.
Mm-hmm.
Naturally, what happened to the person you would be afraid of.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the time where we see things kind of for how they are and put things into perspective. We see things that might intimidate us and recognize in ourselves how easily intimidated we are or how easily we become fearful. you have something, Mitch?
So it's just that you commented it was one man, and that makes me think about how the fear manifested in each individual. You know, that they were fine, perhaps, as a group.
Mm-hmm.
They could hide behind each other if they needed to, in a sense. They had each other to kind of, well, that guy will do it for us or whatever. And when it came down to one man, and you one man have to come face me, then each one was allowing that fear, I think, to really rise up and keep them in an active state.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. That the fact that they saw one man, it kind of made in themselves think, what if I'm the one man that Israel chooses to go against Goliath? Instead of, when before Goliath came out, they're like, well, we can take these people. Or maybe even if they didn't think that, it's like, well, what's a whole army against another army? And they didn't expect someone like Goliath to come out and challenge them to a one-on-one. It's a much different situation there in their minds. Good comments. Any other comments or questions? All right, let's continue on. Starting in verse 12. Someone read, please, verses 12 through verse 19. All right, thank you. So we're introduced in this chapter to a man named David. So he's a young man, the youngest of this man named Jesse's sons. And Jesse's oldest three were in the war. They were soldiers in King Saul's army. And we're actually introduced to David in chapter 16, and where we see that David was a shepherd who was called to be the next king after Saul, the next king of Israel, and that he would go to King Saul and play music for him sometimes. But it says in this passage that he sometimes would return home and care for Jesse's flocks. Well, this David is sent on a mission by Jesse, as we're about to read here, to go and check on his brethren, his brothers there in the war, to see how they are faring. Let's continue on. Verse 20. So David rose early in the morning, left the sheep with a keeper, and took the things and went as Jesse had commanded him. And he came to the camp as the army was going out to the fight and shouting for the battle. For Israel and the Philistines had drawn up in battle array, army against army. And David left his supplies in the hand of the supply keeper, ran to the army, and came and greeted his brothers. Then as he talked with them, there was the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, coming up from the armies of the Philistines. And he spoke according to the same words, so David heard them. Now the same words were the ones that Goliath had challenged Israel before. It says earlier in the passage that he did this morning and evening for 40 days. 80 times they've heard this. They've heard the same challenge for 40 days straight. Now 40 is an important number in the Bible. 40 usually had to do with judgment of something. You remember it rained for 40 days and 40 nights when it came to the flood. The Israelites wandered the desert for 40 years because they were gone for 40 days spying out the land. And now for 40 days, and that's kind of just how this happens, how David comes upon them. On the 40th day, Goliath is making these same claims that he can defeat Israel, making the same challenge to them. And sometimes the fear that we have in our path, whatever's keeping us from obeying God, whatever fear that is, keeps reminding us that it's there. It so happens that whenever you try to obey God and live faithfully towards Him, if there is a fear that presents itself as a temptation, the devil knows how to make that fear keep popping up in places, reminding you, you don't want to do this. You don't want to do this because you're not good at this. You don't want to do this for so-and-so reason. But David here is here to hear this Philistine say the words that he has given Israel. Exactly, chapter 17. That's where we're at. He's here to hear those words. And David has a different opinion about the Philistine. He has a different view of what Goliath is saying to him. Verse 24, and all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, look, they saw the man, they saw the fear they had, fled from him and were dreadfully afraid. So the men of Israel said, have you seen this man who has come up? Surely he has come up to defy Israel. And it shall be that the man who kills him, the king will enrich with great riches, will give him his daughter, and give his father's house exemption from taxes in Israel. So that's the word that's going around camp about what King Saul has said. If someone rises to defeat Goliath, he's going to have great wealth. I'll give him my daughter to be wife, and you'll be related to royalty, and you'll be exempt from all taxes. That's a pretty good deal. That's supposed to be an encouragement to the Israelites to actually fight. Goliath. So that's the rumor that's going around camp, and people are talking about it. I wonder if that's starting to change any hearts. Maybe that's something that's worth going out to potentially die for. But no one has of yet. Then David spoke, verse 26, David spoke to the men who stood by him, saying, what shall be done for the man who kills the Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? You can notice the difference in the tenor of David's voice. He is courageous where the Israelites are afraid and fearful. He says, who is this guy? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he dares defy not just Israel, but the armies of the living God? He's defying God himself. And the people answered him in this manner, saying, so shall it be done for the man who kills him. So they tell David what the rumor is that's spreading throughout the camp. Now Eliab, the oldest brother, heard when he spoke to the men, and Eliab's anger was aroused against David. And he said, why did you come down here? And with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your pride and the insolence of your heart, for you have come down to see the battle. So Eliab, David's older brother, now remember David is the youngest of 8. Eliab's the oldest. So there's some time between these two. And if anyone who has more than one child knows, the oldest tends to be different than the youngest, right? And sometimes they can butt heads. But Eliab sees David, this little brother, coming to this battle, and he's getting more excited about the battle. He's coming to see what happens. He's asking about what will happen. And Eliab rebukes David for it. He becomes angry. He says, what are you doing here, David? Don't you have like a few sheep to go tend? Not only does he tell him he needs to go back and tend the sheep, he says those few sheep, right? He's just trying to insult him a little bit more, trying to jab him a little bit more, like he's not important back home. He's like, I know your heart. You're just here. You want to see the battle. You just want to be in rapture with what's going on here. You know, David has already displayed courage. But sometimes one of the greatest ways that we can be discouraged in obeying God is from those we love most. Sometimes the fear to which we're trying to overcome becomes worse from discouragement from people that we hold in high esteem. And they may not even know they're doing that. They may not know they're discouraging us. But by showing a lack of encouragement, in Eliab's case, he's being outright discouraging, sometimes some people would fall to the fear in that way. How many people have not become Christians because they felt they would be condemning a family member if they did? Just for example, They allow family, people they love dearly, to cause them to not obey the truth. But David doesn't listen to Eliab. Look what he says here. Verse 29, David said, "What have I done now? Is there not a cause? Is there not a purpose to what's going on here?" Then he turned from him toward another. That's important. He turned from Eliab. He stopped listening to Eliab. He stopped listening to the discouragement. He turned from him toward another and said the same thing, and these people answered him as the first ones did. Now when the words which David spoke were heard, they reported them to Saul. The only man showing courage this entire time, his words now are getting all the way to Saul. You have a question or comment back here? Sure. Sure. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Sure. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. You know, David, it's true, David had no military experience. Now, he's had brushes with danger before. He's about to tell Saul that how he killed the bear and killed the lion when they were trying to attack the flock. He killed them with his bare hands. So he's had brushes with death before, and it's been dangerous. But nothing like this. He has not been in battle, as far as we can tell, before. And David is young. The word for calling him a young man, sometimes when we think of that, we think of like a 5-year-old, and sometimes artist depictions are like him like being in elementary school. That's really not the concept of how old David is. The word is pretty flexible for how old he is. The best we can tell, he's probably late teens to early 20s. That's kind of how flexible that term is. Late high school, college student kind of age, the way we think about it. So David's still a young man. You had to be 20 years old to be able to fight in the armies of Israel, according to the law of Moses. So he's probably younger than that. He's probably a late teenager.
His comment probably is total insult to these guys have been here for 40 days now. This grand champion who, the campus kind of collectively decided we just don't have anybody to put against him. We're all scared of him. They had that kind of going. You sort of take solace in the fact that everybody agrees with you. Well, here's this guy who comes in and instantly objects to it, instantly suggests somebody ought to go fight for him. And in saying that, he's saying you should go fight. I'm sure the older brother felt the condemnation of the fact that he hadn't stood up and he hadn't made it.
Absolutely.
So I'm sure everybody who heard him was like, let's shut that kid up, type of deal.
Yeah. I'm sure that Eliab did feel a little bit of embarrassment, and it kind of, instead of it motivating him to be courageous, it turned him into someone who lashed back out at David, because David is actually standing up, or at least so far in words, standing up to what Goliath is saying, and the armies of Israel for over a month now have been cowering to what the Philistine is saying to them. And sure, he's not in the army. Sure. Absolutely. Well, you also think about this, and it might be even just as basic as this for Eliab. Sometimes the older brother doesn't like being shown up by the younger brother. Is that right? Has that ever been true? Sometimes the older brother does not like being shown by the younger brother his own faults and what he's doing. something maybe in Eliab is realizing, I have not actually been courageous in this. And he's lashing back out. Of course, we don't know all that. We're taking lessons from things that might be happening here with David. But for one thing's for sure, David is showing courage in this moment. And it gets to the ears of Saul. They reported him to Saul, and Saul sent for David. Verse 32, then David said to Saul, let no man's heart fall because of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine. And Saul said to David, you are not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are a youth, and he a man of war from his youth. But David said to Saul, your servants used to keep his father's sheep. And when a lion or a bear came and took a lamb out of the flock, I went out after it and struck it and delivered the lamb from its mouth. And when it arose against me, I caught it by its beard and struck and killed it. Your servant has killed both lion and bear. And this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, seeing he has defied the armies of the living God. So Saul is trying to discourage David. He said, you can't do this. You're just a young guy. And this guy has been a warrior since he's been young. You know, sometimes the discouragement is not from loved ones, but it's from roles of authority, right? Sometimes, whether it be the government or whether it be our boss or whatever other role of authority might discourage us from overcoming our fear. But David doesn't even listen to that. He said, no, let me tell you my background. I've been tending sheep for a long time, King Saul, and anytime a bear or a lion comes and snatches away a lamb, I go after it. I don't count my losses. I go after the lamb, and I get the lamb back, and I bring the lamb back. And when that bear and that lion tries to pursue me, I just catch it right by the beard, and I kill it. Anyone in here ever fought a bear? Anyone in here ever fought a lion? Not by its beard, at least. They tend to be a little bit stronger than us, don't they? Yet David, this young boy, young man, has killed them. Grabbed them by the beard even. He got up close. He said, this Philistine's not going to be a problem. So, Saul's convinced. But look at what verse 37 says. Here's the real key issue here. Here's why David will overcome. Moreover, David said, the Lord, who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, he will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. That convinced Saul. Saul said to David, go, and the Lord be with you. So Saul clothed David with his armor, and he put a bronze helmet on his head. He also clothed him with a coat of mail. David fastened his sword to his armor and tried to walk, for he had not tested them. And David said to Saul, I cannot walk with these, for I have not tested them. So David took them off. So Saul says, okay, if you're going to go, you need to at least take my armor. If you're going to overcome, you need to at least do it the way I want you to. But so David said, he tries them on, and he says, this is awkward. I can't move in these. They're probably a little too big, because remember, Saul is a head above other Israelites. He's a tall guy. And he says, I'm not practiced with these. I'm not trained with these. I've not tested these. He says, this is not going to work out. You got a question or comment?
It's interesting, everything that we've read so far, and this is especially related to what you're saying. If you look at the words, what David said versus what David said and what King Saul said, nobody mentions God except David.
Absolutely.
Now, if this is the army of God, supposedly, you gotta wonder why. After all he's done, just like everything else, after all he's done, why would somebody ask Saul, say, God is mine, don't worry about it, guys. I'll take care of it, my number one man, General will take care of it. It's interesting that nobody mentions the living God except David.
Absolutely. And it's precisely because they forgot God that their fear overcame them. That's exactly why their fear overcame them. They forgot about God. This is not the first time this has happened to Israel. If you read just throughout the history books of Israel, you see this happen over and over again. And it's not so different for us, right? Has there ever been times where we've been overcome by a temptation, even if it's fear, that fear causes us to not do something we're supposed to do? We wouldn't say we disbelieve God. In fact, we might, because of fear, not evangelize on Saturday, then come worship on Sunday, right? It's not like the Israelites didn't believe in God. But in this moment of testing, they forgot him.
He went to the back of their minds instead of the forefront.
Yeah, exactly. He went to the back of their minds. And for David, as we'll mention here about him mentioning the Lord here in just a second, he went to the forefront. But anyway, David has tried on Saul's armor, and he takes them off because they're not going to work. Then he took his staff in his hand, and he chose for himself 5 smooth stones from the brook, and put them in a shepherd's bag, in a pouch which he had, and a sling was in his hand. He drew near to the Philistine. So David takes off Saul's armor, and he goes to the things that he is familiar with. He takes his staff, and he goes to the brook and takes 5 smooth stones. Every detail, by the way, in the Bible is important. There's a reason the Holy Spirit inspired these words. Why is it, you think, that David took 5 smooth stones for one man? It mentions 5 smooth stones. The Bible doesn't give many details about certain things, but when it does give a detail, it matters. Why 5 smooth stones? Well, smooth, we'll go ahead and answer smooth. Smooth is more aerodynamic. Okay, we got that out of the way. Why 5? You know what? That's actually a valid point. Some people talk about, and other passages mention that but Goliath has 4 other brothers. That's true. He does have 4 other brothers. I don't know if they're there at this time. They might be, but they could have been. So it could have been he took 5 for one for each one of them. They wanted to come back up and challenge him again. Or it could be the case that David, even though David is full of faith, recognizes this might be complicated. There might be some complexity to this. As the account goes, David slings the stone. God did not guide the stone miraculously to the forehead of Goliath. The whole point is that David is trusting in the Lord. Sure, he has his courage in the Lord, but David's done this before, right? David just slings the stone. There's nothing about God miraculously guiding the stone. David is perhaps preparing in case it gets a little more complicated. Maybe he thinks, I'll hit him with the first one. Maybe that might not be enough. And so he's preparing himself. That's the point. When we're going to overcome fear, we must prepare ourselves to face the fear, right? If your fear is, and I've been mentioning this a lot, but it seems the most apt to a lot of Christians. If your fear is evangelizing, sharing the gospel with others, and the fear you have of that is that I don't know enough to share the gospel. My question to you is, what are you doing to prepare yourself to know more? Are you studying like you should? Are you using brotherhood resources that are freely given like you should? Are you asking questions of your elders or those who in your life who are spiritually mature like you should? What are you doing to prepare yourself for overcoming fear? David prepared himself. Let's continue on. Our time is running short. So he draws near to the Philistine. That's an important point. He goes to him. So the Philistine came and began drawing near to David. As David drew near to the fear drew near to him. And the man who bore the shield went before him. And when the Philistine looked about and saw David, he disdained him, for he was only a youth, ruddy and good-looking. So the Philistine said to David, "Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks?" Remember, he has a staff in his hand. And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. So Goliath uses his own gods to curse David. Right? But we know his gods are nothing, so the curse is nothing. Right? David is this young man, ruddy and good looking. I believe that point is specifically mentioned here because he's not war-torn. He's not been through this before. And he's like, of all this people in Israel, you send this guy, this young man with a stick in his hand. He said, am I a dog that you come to me with a stick? So Goliath is insulted. He said, okay, this is what we're going to do. And the Philistine said to David, come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and to the beasts of the field. Then David said to the Philistine, you come to me with a sword, with a spear, and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you and take your head from you. And this day I will give the carcasses of the camp of the Philistines to the birds of the air and the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. I want you to notice something. In your own time afterwards, I could be wrong about this. I heard it before, and I believe I've checked it, and I think it's at least accurate. David specifically mentions Goliath twice. But he mentions the Lord 9 times. Think about that. Whatever the actual number might be, it might be a few off. He mentions the Lord more than he mentions David. So let's go with just the 2 to 9 figure here. He mentions Goliath 2 times. He mentions the Lord 9. Brethren, we would do well in overcoming fear if our God thoughts outnumbered our Goliath thoughts 4 to 1. If we far more often focused on God than on Goliath. I'm pushing to where I'm out of time now, so we'll go ahead and just finish the account. Of course, David draws back, they run at each other, and he draws back and he slings his stone. That first stone sails into the forehead of Goliath, sinks in, and Goliath falls face first to the earth. And the Philistines see this, and they are the cowards now. They run in terror, and the Israelites are all of a sudden emboldened by David's act of courage. And they chase the Philistines, and a great victory is won for Israel. David goes and cuts the head off Goliath and presents it to Saul. And from that point on, David has high standing among the Israelites. He's even promoted to be part of the army of King Saul, and then onward from there. David was just winning a battle for Israel. He knew that the Lord is the one who the battle belonged to, because that's what David specifically says. The battle belongs to the Lord. But his act of courage emboldened other people to be courageous. You know, some people, I've had people before who I'll make a point in a lesson, and they'll come to me, shake my hand, and whisper to me. And I know it's a controversial point. And they'll say, by the way, I agree with you. And I appreciate that they agree. But where's their courage? Where's their courage to boldly stand for it? Sometimes courage allows others to experience courage. Sometimes when we make a choice to overcome any fear in our way, that allows people to say, maybe I could overcome that too. I wonder if Eliab's opinion changed of David. I know King Saul's did, according to how this account ends. What fear is in your path? What is standing in your way from doing all you can to be faithful to the Lord? Will you have the courage of David and overcome it? Because the courage of David did not rely on his own strength or his own skill or his own background. It was in the Lord. Don't forget that. Let your God thoughts outnumber your Goliath thoughts. And with that, we will conclude this morning. Thank you so much for your kind attention this morning.